She set the clipboard on the counter and told me to clock out for the last time, smiling like she was handing me a gift. 11 years, I had worked the overnight shifts for Brennan Home Care, and not once had I been paid as an employee. Not 1 hour. Here is what she did not know. My name and my social security number were already printed across 41 paychecks. I never cashed and never saw. Every one of them signed for by a hand that was not mine and deposited into an account I had never opened. I left that night with a cardboard box, a dead man's watch, and a single time card she forgot to take off the wall. Today, I take payrolls apart for a living. I am a certified fraud examiner, and the thing I am best at in the world is finding the people who pay no one and keep all of it. Last spring, I finally pulled apart the wages they built in my name, and I made every stolen hour land back on the people who took it, down to the cent. My name is Marin Cole. I am 36 years old. And if you have ever been the one the family leaned on for everything and counted as nothing, the one who was told that love was its own paycheck, then stay with me. The cheapest thing in that building, the thing nobody would look at twice, was about to become the only honest record in the room. Welcome back to Quiet Ledger, where the people who get talked over keep their voices low and let the paperwork do the shouting. If you have ever been handed the smallest seat at the table, this one is yours. Stay to the end. The way this turns is the whole reason I am telling it. Let me take you to the night I walked out, because that night pays back everything. It was a Tuesday in March 2010 in the morning, and I was standing in the back office of the Brennan Home Care building on Lurton Street with a box of my own things at my feet. A travel mug, a cardigan I kept on the chair, a framed photo of my father in his good shirt, and the watch, his watch. The one that still ran 4 minutes fast because he liked a head start on the day. I had finished my last overnight an hour before, a long one, sitting with a man named Earl, who could not sleep without someone in the chair by the window. I had clocked out of his house the way I always did, in my own quiet way, and driven to the office to drop the visit logs, because that was the rule. The relief aide for the morning had called in. Diane was covering the desk herself, which she almost never did, and I should have known that meant she wanted to watch me leave with her own eyes. The building was dark, except for the desk lamp. The old gold letters above the time clock caught the light. We don't watch the clock here. We're family. I had walked under those words 4 nights a week for 11 years and never once read them as a threat. That morning, I finally did. Diane was on the other side of the counter. My stepmother, calm as still water. The way she always was when she was winning. She slid the clipboard toward me and asked me to sign the last visit log of the night. And then she said the thing she had been saying to me for 11 years. The thing painted in gold letters on the wall above the old time clock. We don't watch the clock here. Marin, we're family. I had heard that sentence so many times it had stopped being words. It was the wallpaper of my whole adult life. We're family. We don't watch the clock. Which always meant the same thing in that building. It meant you work, and we keep the money. I signed the log. I picked up my box. And as I turned, I reached up and took my time card off the little brass hook. Beside the clock, the card with my name handwritten across the top in my own block print. She watched me do it, and she did not say a word. Because to Diane that card was scrap, a dead clock, and a piece of cardboard nobody read. She had no idea I had been feeding that card into that clock at the start and end of every single shift for years. A clock, she thought, was decoration. A record, she thought, did not exist. If you have ever kept a quiet record of your own life because some part of you knew, before you could explain why, that one day you would need proof you were real, then you already understand what that card was to me. I want to tell you, I felt powerful walking out of there. I did not. I felt $62,000. Tired, I sat in my car in that empty lot with the heater ticking and the box on the passenger seat. And I cried, once. And if I went, the only time in this whole story that I let myself. Hard, ugly, alone, with both hands over my mouth. So the sound stayed inside the car. Then I wiped my face with the cardigan, set the watch on the dash, where I could see it. And I drove home. That was the last soft thing I let myself do for a long time, because the next morning, the careful part of me woke up, and the careful part of me does not cry. It counts. At Skandar, let me back up and show you who these people were, because the math only makes sense. Once you know the family, my father was Gil Cole. He started the agency in 2004 with a partner, a quiet retired machinist named Hollis Petrak. The man who taught me the only thing that ever saved me. Back then, it was 2 men, a van, and a list of elderly clients who needed someone to show up at 3 a.m. when the bad hours came. My father was warm and useless with paper. Hollis was the opposite. Hollis ran the back office, and he used a cast iron mechanical time clock that stamped the date and the hour in purple ink on a card. The kind every factory in the county had thrown out years before. A clock doesn't care who is watching. Hollis told me the first week I worked there. I was 19. It only keeps the time you give it. You give it honest time, Marin, and it'll give it right back to you someday. I thought he was being folksy. I wrote it down anyway, because I wrote everything down. That was already who I was. I am going to come back to that sentence, because it turned out to be the truest thing anyone ever said to me. Then 2 things happened, close together. Hollis's heart gave out in 2012, and my father, lonely and tired, married Diane Brennan. Diane came in, soft. That is the part people never believe. She did not come in like a villain. She came in concerned. She came in organized. She brought binders. She brought a label maker and a calm voice, and a way of ending every disagreement by saying, "I just want what is best for everyone," in a tone that made you feel small for wanting anything at all. Within 2 years, the company had her name on it. Brennan Home Care. My father's name came off the door, and he barely noticed, because by then, she handled all of it. The billing, the payroll, the contracts, the bank. My father shook hands and visited clients, and felt like the boss, and Diane ran the numbers, in the back where the light was bad, and the door was usually closed. I remember the exact afternoon I should have understood her, and didn't. It was the spring of 2016. My father wanted to give me a small raise, an actual one, and he said so out loud at a staff lunch. Proud of himself, in front of everyone. Diane smiled and squeezed his hand and said, "Warm as anything, of course, Gil. We'll look at the numbers." And the numbers were never looked at. There was no raise. Because there was no wage to raise. There was only the slogan and the lunch. And my father feeling generous for a day. That was how she worked. She never told you no. She just let the paperwork quietly say it for her. Weeks later, when no one was looking, and me, I was the one who showed up. That was always my job in that family, showing up. I drove the overnights. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4, 10 hours a shift. The worst hours with the hardest clients. The ones whose families could not handle the 3 in the morning calls. I sat with Mrs. Vance while she forgot her own children's names and remembered. Perfectly. A song from 1941. I changed bandages. I called ambulances. I held hands while people died, and I filled out the paperwork after. Neat and complete. Every time. For 11 years. And I want to be exact about the money. Because exact is the whole point of this story. In 11 years at that company, the amount Brennan Home Care paid me, the actual person into my actual hands, or my actual bank account, was $0. Nothing. Not minimum wage. Not overtime. Not a holiday. They covered my gas. They bought me lunch. Sometimes. And every time I worked up the nerve to ask, Diane would tilt her head, look almost hurt, and say the sentence, "We don't watch the clock here. Marin, we're family. And you'll always be taken care of. You'll always be taken care of. Remember that one. It comes back, too." Here is the thing that should have warned me sooner. I was not stupid about money. I have never been stupid about money. I just could not imagine the shape of what was actually happening, because the shape of it was so much worse than being underpaid. I was not being underpaid. On paper, I was being paid a fortune. I just never saw a dollar of it. Stay with me. This is where it starts to turn. Let me give you the 4 moments that taught me who Diane really was, because I did not understand the pattern until I lined them up. And a pattern is the only thing that ever tells the truth. The first one looked like nothing. It was 2015, my first winter under Diane's management. She caught me in the break room with a single sheet of paper and a pen, friendly as anything, just a formality for the file. "Sweetheart," she said, "tax stuff. You are more of an independent contractor than an employee. The way you work, it is actually better for you. Less taken out." The sheet was titled, "Independent Contractor Acknowledgement." I signed it. Of course, I signed it. She was my stepmother, and I was 25, and I trusted that the woman who made my father smile again would not hand me a knife and call it a formality. What that single sheet did, I would not understand for 9 years. It was Diane building her defense before she had even committed the crime. It was her saying, in writing, in my own handwriting, "This person is not our employee. We owe her nothing," before she went ahead and put me on the payroll anyway, secretly, as someone she could pay and rob in the same motion. That is the kind of woman she was. She did not lose her temper. She built a paper trail and waited. The second moment is the one I will never forgive. October 2018. I was at Mrs. Vance's house on the overnight when my phone lit up at 19:40 in the morning. It was my aunt. Breathless. My father had collapsed at home. A stroke. The ambulance was already on the way to St. Cyril's. I stood in Mrs. Vance's dark kitchen with the phone against my ear and my whole body pointed toward the door. St. Cyril's was 9 minutes away. I knew because I had driven my father there twice before for his heart. 9 minutes. I called Diane. I told her my father was being taken to the hospital, that I needed a relief aid now, that I had to go. And Diane, calm, so calm, said, "Marin, we cannot leave Mrs. Vance alone. There is no one to cover. At this hour, you know, the rules. Your father is in good hands. I'll keep you posted." I argued, once, quietly. The only time I ever argued with her. I said, "Please." I said, "It is my dad." And she said the thing that should have ended us right there. Soft as a lullaby. Family doesn't walk out on a shift. Marin, that is not who we are. I stayed. God help me. I stayed. I sat in the chair by Mrs. Vance's bed until the morning aide arrived at 6. And then I drove to St. Cyril's with both hands shaking on the wheel. And by the time I got there, my father had been stabilized and was asleep, and the worst hours were already behind him. Hours I had spent in another woman's house, because my stepmother told me a billable client could not be left. Months later, going through old records for a reason I will get to, I found the billing for that exact night. Brennan Home Care had billed Mrs. Vance's long-term care insurer for 2 aides that night. 2. There was only ever one of me. The second aide was a name on a sheet. Hours that were never worked, a visit that never happened, billed and collected at a premium overnight rate. Diane did not keep me at that house. Because Mrs. Vance needed 2 people, she kept me there because my staying made her phantom paperwork look real. If anyone ever checked, there would be a real aide, me, clocked, in honest hours, standing next to the fake one she invented. My father had a stroke 9 minutes away, and my stepmother used the worst night of my life as the alibi for a fraudulent invoice. He lived. By the way, he was never the same, but he lived 4 more years. I am glad I have those years. I am just sorry for the price of the one night. The third moment is small, and it is the one that cracked the door. Spring 2022. I was emptying the office shredder bin because no one else ever did. And a strip of paper that had missed the blades fell out and drifted to the floor. I almost swept it up with the rest. I am glad I did not. It was the top corner of a pay stub, the kind a payroll service prints. And the name on it was mine. Marin E. Cole. There was a pay period date. A 2-week stretch from that February. There was a gross amount and a column of withholdings, federal and state, and the rest. All the things a real employee has taken out. And there was a net pay figure, the take-home number, $980. For a pay period I had, as always, been paid nothing for. I stood there, holding it under the bad office light, for a long time. $980. A check, in my name, with taxes taken out as if I were a real employee, for 2 weeks of pay I had never received. I told myself a dozen reasonable things. A clerical error. A leftover record from years ago. A test entry in new software. I am a careful person, and careful people are very good at explaining away the first sign of something they are not ready to see. The mind protects you from the thing that would change everything, but I did not throw the strip away. I have never in my life thrown away a number I could not explain. I smoothed it flat and I put it inside the green spiral notebook I carried. The shift book where I logged my own hours out of pure stubborn habit. The same book Diane once picked up at a staff meeting, waved in the air, and called my little security blanket while everyone laughed. I tucked that scrap of a check between 2 pages like pressing a flower, and I kept it the way you keep a key before you know which door it opens. That detail matters later. Hold on to it. $980. You will see that exact number again 40 more times. The fourth moment was my father's funeral. In the fall of 2022, I expected grief. I did not expect the will. Gil Cole, my father, left almost nothing in his own name. Because Diane had spent a decade moving everything into hers and into the company's. The house was the company's. The accounts were the company's. What he had to leave me was a wristwatch that ran 4 minutes fast, and a sealed envelope that the lawyer said my father had asked to be handed to me privately. Inside the envelope was a single index card. In my father's shaky late handwriting, it said, Marin, I signed things I shouldn't have. Ask Hollis's clock. I am sorry. Dad. Ask Hollis's clock. I sat in my car in the funeral home lot and read it 4 times. My father, who could barely write by then, had spent some of his last clear strength telling me to ask a dead machine on a wall a question. And I, of all the people he could have left it to, was the one person on earth who had never stopped feeding that clock. That night, I drove to the office after everyone had gone. I let myself in. I went to the wall where the old cast iron clock hung above the gold letters that said, "We don't watch the clock. We're family." And I took down the steel card rack beside it, the rack Diane thought was empty. The rack she never checked because to her it was part of the decoration. It was not empty. It was full of years. My years. Every card I had ever fed it, stamped in purple ink with a date and an hour, an honest record of every honest shift, kept by a machine that did not care who was watching. Exactly the way Hollis said. I took the whole rack home in my arms, like it was made of glass. Before I show you what those cards proved, let me tell you about the one person who got me out of there alive. Because I would not have made it without him. And I have never gotten to thank him in a way that counted. I told you Hollis Petrak died in 2012. He did. But Hollis gave me 2 things before he went, and one of them I did not understand for 10 years. The first was the habit of the clock. He taught me to stamp in and stamp out every shift, no exceptions, even after the agency stopped using the cards for payroll, even after Diane disconnected it from anything that mattered. It is for you, not for them, he told me. Someday somebody's going to tell you that you didn't do something you did, and you are going to reach into a drawer and hand them the truth, stamped and dated. Let them argue with the machine. The second thing was the sentence I already gave you. The one I wrote down at 19. A clock doesn't care who is watching. It only keeps the time you give it. I want to tell you the actual day he said it. Because it is the day that, looking back, the whole rest of my life was hiding inside. It was a winter morning in 2007. I had come in for a day shift and found that the heat had failed in the office overnight, and the old time clock had frozen. The ink stiff, the mechanism slow. I was ready to give up on it, to just write my hours on a pad. Hollis came in stamping snow off his boots, took one look, set a small space heater in front of the clock, and waited. He did not hurry it. He cleaned the stamp head with a cloth and a drop of oil while the machine warmed. The way you would tend to something living. People think a record is paperwork, he said, not looking up. It isn't. A record is a promise you make to a version of yourself you haven't met yet, the you who is going to need it. He fed a blank card in, and the clock caught and stamped the date clean and true. A clock doesn't care who is watching, Marin. It only keeps the time you give it. You give it honest time, and one day, it gives it right back to you. When you've got nobody else in your corner. I was 19. I thought he was a kind old man, being sentimental, about a machine. I wrote the sentence in the back of my green notebook, and forgot I had written it. 15 years later, I would find that page again, in my own teenage handwriting, the night before I walked into the room where it finally mattered, and I would understand that Hollis had handed me the whole map at 19 and trusted me to keep walking it. Hollis listened to me in a way no one in my family ever did. He never tried to fix my life. He never told me to stand up to my father, or to want more, or to be tougher. He just believed, plainly and without drama, that an honest record outlasts a loud man. He was right. He was so completely right that I built the rest of my life on that one sentence. And it carried me all the way to the room where it finally mattered. So, those are the pieces. A woman who handed me a knife and called it a formality. A night she used my father's stroke as cover, a scrap of a check in my own name, a dying man's note that said, "Ask the clock," and a wall full of cards that I had been keeping, without knowing why, for the exact day they would save me. Now let me tell you what I became. Because the woman who walked back into that building was not the one who walked out. Here is the part I am going to move through fast, because the years where you rebuild are not the interesting part. The interesting part is what you do with them. I left Brennan home care for good that March night. The night I took my card off the hook. I had no savings, because you cannot save zero. I had a box, a watch, a green notebook, and a steel rack of time cards in the trunk of a paid-off car. For 18 months, I worked 2 jobs that actually paid. I did medical billing for a dialysis clinic during the day, the very skill, it turned out, that would let me read everything Diane had done. And at night I took online courses in forensic accounting, the way other people watch television, sitting at my kitchen table with the watch on the wall in front of me. Still, 4 minutes fast. Still telling me I had a head start if I wanted it. I passed the Certified Fraud Examiner exam. On a rainy Thursday in the 2nd year, I framed the certificate and hung it next to the watch. Then I did the same for the next exam, and the one after that. I got hired by a firm that investigates payroll fraud and worker misclassification for a living, which is a sentence I want you to sit with for a second. The family told me I was the soft one, the one who was good with old people and bad with everything else. The one who would always need taking care of. And I went and became a professional who is paid to find the exact crime that was being committed against me the entire time they were saying it. I did not do any of that for revenge. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I needed to understand. The scrap of a check in my name had been sitting in my green notebook like a splinter for 2 years, and I could not rest until I knew what it was a piece of. By the spring after my father died, I finally had the training, the distance, and the steel rack of cards to find out. Stay with me. This is where the cheapest thing in the building becomes the most expensive thing in their lives. I laid it all out on my kitchen table under good light, the way I lay out a damaged record, before I read it. The green notebook. The single index card from my father. The rack of time cards, sorted by year. And one thing I had every legal right to request, and had never thought to, until I knew what I was looking for. My own wage and income transcript from the IRS. If you have never pulled yours, You can. It is your own record of every dollar any employer ever reported paying you, under your own social security number. For any year, it is free. It is yours. And mine told me a story I was not ready for. For the years 2019 through 2022. Brennan Home Care had reported paying me wages, real wages. W-2 wages, the kind an actual employee earns, reported to the government under my social security number, with taxes supposedly withheld. I read it the way I read evidence, one line at a time, refusing to jump ahead, because jumping ahead is how careful people miss the thing that matters. Page 1. An employer name. I knew better than my own. Page 2. A wage figure, where there should have been a blank. Page 3. Withholdings, neat columns of them, federal and state and Medicare. All deducted from money I never touched, as if the government itself had been told a story about my life that I was only now reading for the first time. In 2019, they reported paying me $9,800. In 2020, $10,780. In 2021, $10,780 again. In 2022, $8,820. Add those four numbers together, and you get $40,180. $40,180, reported to the United States government as money paid to Marin Cole, in the same years that Brennan Home Care paid Marin Cole. The living person at the table. Nothing at all. I sat very still, because I understood. Finally, all of it at once. The contractor form, the phantom pay stub in the shredder, the whole shape of it. Diane had run me as a ghost. Here is the trick. Plain enough for anyone half listening. She told me, to my face, that I was an independent contractor. Family, off the clock, that kept me from ever expecting a paycheck or a W-2. So I never went looking for one. Then behind the closed office door, she put me on the books anyway as a regular employee, and she issued real paychecks in my name, 41 of them over 4 years. And she forged my endorsement and deposited everyone into an account she controlled. It did 2 things for her, and they were both beautiful and both crimes. It gave the company a fat payroll expense, my fake wages, that lowered its taxable income, and it turned $40,180 of company money into clean personal cash in her pocket. Laundered straight through my name. I was not the underpaid stepdaughter. I was the wash cycle. And the worst, sharpest part, the part that made me put down my pen and breathe for a minute, was this. If anyone ever accused her of not paying me, she had her answer. Ready. She would tilt her head, look hurt, and produce 4 years of W-2, showing she had paid me over $40,000. The fraud was also her alibi. The robbery came with its own receipt. She had thought of everything. Except Hollis. Except the clock. Except the one record she did not control. Because here is what I did next, and this is the hinge of the entire story. So, let me be exact. The IRS transcript told me what they claimed I had been paid. The 41 checks, when the bank records finally surfaced later, would tell where the money actually went. But neither of those, by itself, could prove the wages were fake. A skeptic could say, maybe I really was paid and just forgot. People are sloppy. Memory is weak. The time cards were not weak. I spent 3 nights on my living room, floor with them. I am not exaggerating that. For effect. I laid the cards out in rows by year, 208 weeks of purple stamps, and beside them I laid the IRS transcript, and beside that the company's own billing records, which I had every right to as a former worker requesting my own employment file under state law, and which Diane, arrogant and certain no one would ever look, actually mailed to me in a fat envelope. Without a second thought, then I did the slow work, the work I am paid to do for strangers, and was finally doing for myself, card by card, date by date, hour by hour. I am trained to read records that do not want to be read. Water-stained logs and faded due date cards, and handwriting in 3 languages. A wall of honest timestamps was the easiest thing I had ever read, because it was the one record in the entire story that had never once lied, and the cards did 4 things. No story could argue with. They proved I was physically present, stamped in honest purple ink, working real overnight shifts. On the exact nights the company was reporting wages to my ghost, they proved the hours. A ghost cannot punch a clock. I had. They proved that on the night of my father's stroke in October 2018, I was clocked in at Mrs. Vance's house from 9:40 in the evening until 6 in the morning. One person, alone, the whole night. While the billing for that night showed 2 aides on the invoice, the card was the witness that the second aide never existed. In 3 separate weeks, the cards proved I was stamped in at one client's home, at the very same hour the agency's billing showed me, by name. At a different client's home across the county, Marin Cole cannot be in 2 houses. At 2 in the morning, the clock said where I really was. The invoice was a lie, and the clock had been quietly catching it for years, stamp by stamp, while everyone laughed at the cardboard. And the 4th thing was the one that closed the trap. When the agencies later pulled the bank records, the 41 checks turned up, all 41. Each one for $980. The same number from the scrap in my notebook. Each one endorsed on the back with a looping signature that spelled my name, and was not, in any letter, my hand. I have printed my name in hard square capitals since Hollis taught me to fill a card. The person who signed those checks wrote in cursive, fast and confident, and deposited everyone into a personal account that was never mine. My own true handwriting, on 208 time cards, was the standard that proved the signatures were forged. The honest record did not just prove what I did, it proved what she did, by being the one thing she could not fake. Let me do the other piece of math out loud, because I did it that night, and it steadied me. I worked, conservatively, 3 overnight shifts a week, 10 hours a shift, across the same 48 months. Those fake wages, covered 3 times 10, is 30 hours a week. 48 months is 208 weeks. 208 times 30 is 6,240 hours. 6,240 hours of actual labor at the state minimum wage of $10.45 an hour before a single minute of the overtime I was owed. That is $65,208 in wages I earned and was never paid. $65,208. They owed me $40,180. They stole, using my name, and 1 steel rack of cardboard kept by a dead man's clock. That could prove every dollar of both, the cheapest thing in the building. I want you to remember what they called it: decoration. Scrap. My security blanket. If you have ever been told that the careful thing you do, the receipts you keep, the notebook you fill, makes you difficult or paranoid or small, I need you to hear me. Keep doing it. Comment the word keep below. If you have ever kept a record, nobody thought you needed, because one day the difficult, careful person is the only one left standing in the room, holding the truth, stamped and dated. Exactly like Hollis said. Now, here is where a lot of stories go wrong. And where I refused to. I had enough to destroy her. The temptation was to do it loud, to walk into a family dinner and throw the transcript on the table, to scream the way I had never once let myself scream. I did not do that. And not because I am noble. I did not do that. Because loud is how you lose. Loud gives them something to argue with. Loud turns a crime into a family disagreement, and a family disagreement into he said, she said. And then nothing happens. And you are the bitter one. I did not want a scene. I wanted a verdict. So I did it the way Hollis taught me, on paper. Slowly, and impossible to shout down. First, I did the one thing I had standing to do, and a duty to do. I reported the misuse of my own social security number. I filed an identity theft affidavit with the IRS, documenting that wages had been reported under my name and number that I never received. And I attached my transcript and a sworn statement. That is not revenge. That is a victim reporting a crime against herself, which is the most ordinary, lawful thing in the world. And it was the thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything. Because the IRS does not forgive a payroll that lies to it. Second, I filed a wage claim with the state for the wages I was actually owed. The $65,208. Attaching the time cards as evidence of hours worked. Third, because the billing fraud touched a long-term care insurer and the state's elderly care funds. I made a report to the state agency that licenses home care providers and to the insurer's fraud unit, laying out the phantom visits with the card dates beside the invoice dates. I did not break a single rule to do any of it. I did not hack anything, leak anything, or forge anything. I requested my own records, which were mine. I reported crimes committed against me and against vulnerable elderly clients, which is the law and the right thing. Diane had built her whole defense on paper. And I simply handed honest paper to the people whose job it is to read it. I let the system she had been hiding behind turn around and look straight at her. And then I did the only face-to-face part of this whole story, because she asked for it. And because I wanted her to hear it from me before the letters started arriving. Diane called me 11 days after I filed. She had heard, through a clerk somewhere, that a wage claim had been opened. She did not know about the rest yet. She was still calm. But it was the calm of someone who has felt the floor move and is pretending it didn't. "Marin," she said, warm as a knife in a drawer. "I think there has been a misunderstanding, and I'd hate for the family to get dragged through something ugly. Come by the office. Let's sort it out." Just us. I went. Of course. I went. I wanted to be in that room. One more time. I will tell you exactly how that meeting went, because it is the closest thing to justice that happened in person. And because I did not raise my voice once. It was a Thursday. 4 p.m., the office. Español. The gold letters on the wall. The clock still hanging there. Still ticking the honest time. Diane sat behind the desk with a settlement document already printed. A single page offering me, and I am not making this up, $3,000 to sign away, any and all claims against Brennan Home Care, and a confidentiality clause. and a line acknowledging I had been a contractor, fully compensated for all services. She slid it across the desk toward me, and she said, "Soft. Sign this, Marin," and we put it all behind us. Family doesn't punch a clock. We don't do this to each other. Family doesn't punch a clock. There it was. One last time, the slogan she had used to rob me for 11 years. Offered now as a reason to let her keep doing it. I did not sign it. I did not argue with it. Either. I have learned that arguing is for people who are not sure they are right. I was sure. I opened my folder and I set things on the desk, one at a time, and I told her facts in plain numbers. Because facts do not need a raised voice, I said. 1. The IRS shows you reported, paying me $40,180 across 4 years. I was paid nothing. I have filed an affidavit. They are already looking. I said. 2. I have my time cards. Every shift, stamped and dated, from a clock you forgot still worked. They prove the hours you say I was a contractor for. And they prove that on the night my father had his stroke, you billed 2 aides when there was only ever one of me. I said. 3. The cards put me at one client's home at the same hour. Your invoices put me at another. I have already given the dates to the insurer and to the state licensing board. I said. 4. I am owed $65,208 in unpaid wages. That claim is filed. And I said. 5. I am not here to negotiate. I am here so that when the letters arrive, you will know they came from me. And you will know they are not a misunderstanding. Then I picked up her $3,000 settlement. And I did not tear it up because tearing things up is loud. I set it back down on her side of the desk, squared the corner, and left it there. Diane did not say a word. For the first time in 11 years, the calm cracked, and underneath it, there was nothing clever at all. Just a woman doing math. She was going to lose. I took my father's watch off my wrist, looked at it. 4 minutes fast, and I said the only thing I had left to say. You told me I'd always be taken care of. I put the watch back on. Turns out, I take care of it myself. I walked to the door of the same office I had walked out of a year before, with a box at my feet. The first time, I left to the sound of that slogan, and I smiled so she would not see anything at all. This time I left to silence, and the smile, when it came in the parking lot, was only for me. Now let me tell you what the paper did, because this is the part the loud people never get, and it is the only part that actually counts. The reckoning came the way Hollis built me, to make it come, slowly. On letterhead. Impossible. To shout down, the state wage claim resolved first, because the time cards left nothing to argue. Brennan Home Care was found liable for the unpaid wages, and with the penalties the state adds for willful non-payment. The number landed above $100,000 owed to me, a finding, in writing, on government paper, that said in language no family dinner could ever overturn. She was wrong. I was right. And here, on a state seal, was the exact size of it. The IRS matter moved slower and hit harder, because lying to a payroll system is not the kind of thing that forgives itself. The fake wages reported under my name unraveled the agency's books from the inside. The company's payroll account was frozen. During the review, Diane, who had signed those filings, was personally exposed for the fraudulent returns and the laundering of company money through a ghost employee. That is not a wage dispute. That is the federal kind of trouble, and the licensing board and the insurer's fraud unit, working from my card dates against the invoices, issued their own written finding that Brennan Home Care had billed for visits that never happened, including for vulnerable clients, on the public's dime. The agency's license was suspended, then pulled. The insurer demanded back every dollar of the phantom visits. With penalties, clients were transferred to other agencies. The doors on Lurton Street closed. I have a copy of the board's finding in a folder in my office. There is one line in it I read more than once. It says, in the flat language those agencies use, that the provider's records were contradicted by contemporaneous time records maintained by the complainant. Contemporaneous time records maintained by the complainant. That is a government office, in writing, calling a wall of cardboard. Nobody would look at the thing that brought down the lie. Hollis would have liked that sentence. He would not have said so. He would just have nodded once and oiled the stamp head. There was a restitution order, too, and to satisfy it, the assets had to be sold. The building on Lurton Street, the one with the gold letters on the wall, the building my father started in 2004 with Hollis and a van, was put up and sold. And the money went toward repaying what had been taken from clients and from the funds that served them. The slogan came down with the drywall. I did not go to watch. I had already taken the only thing in that building that was ever mine. I want to be careful here, because I am not going to pretend I enjoyed all of it. There were real, elderly people who liked that agency, and real aides who had nothing to do with Diane's books and lost a job they needed. I did not celebrate that. There is no champagne in watching your family's name become the thing the county clerk lowers her voice to mention. But I did not look away from it either, because the alternative was letting it keep happening. And I was done letting things keep happening. Diane did not go quietly into the paperwork. They never do. This is the part where the anger you have been holding gets to breathe, and she called me after the license was pulled. Voicemails. First, the warm ones. Family doesn't do this to family. Think of what your father would want. We can still fix this if you'll just talk to me. I did not answer. Then the bargaining ones offering money now, a real number this time, $40,050. As if she could buy back the truth at the price she had stolen it for. I did not answer those either. Then the cold ones. You'll regret this. You have no idea what you've started. You were always jealous of what your father and I built. I deleted those without finishing them. Then she showed up, once, at the lobby of the firm where I work, the firm that investigates exactly her kind of crime for a living. She stood at the front desk asking for me with that same hurt tilt of her head, dressed for sympathy, ready to perform for whoever was watching. The receptionist called up. I came down to the glass. I did not open the door. I looked at the woman who had used my father's stroke as an alibi, and my name as a bank account for 11 years, and I said one sentence through the glass, quiet enough that she had to lean in to hear it. Everything I gave that clock, it gave back. Then I turned around and rode the elevator up, and I let the glass door close on the sound of her saying my name. She left. More voicemails. After that, I stopped listening to them. Some doors you close on purpose, and you do not open them again, to check if the person is still knocking. That is not coldness. That is a record, finally, of who deserves my time, kept by the one person who gets to keep it. Me. I told you I would not give you a cheap reunion, and I will not. I did not get my family back. My father was gone. The man who might have been sorry was in the ground, with a watch on my wrist, instead of his. Diane is not in my life, and never will be. And the truth is, I do not miss the version of family she sold me. Because it was never real. It was just a slogan. Over a clock. But I did not come out of it with nothing. I came out with one thread worth keeping. Diane had a son, my stepbrother, Eli, who was 14 when all of this came down, and had no part in any of it. A quiet kid. The kind who notices things. During the worst of it, when his own mother was telling anyone who would listen that I had torn the family apart out of spite. Eli sent me one message. He said, "I always knew you actually did the work. I am sorry nobody ever said it." I read it 4 times. The same way I read everything that matters. I drove out and took him for a burger, and I told him the only thing I wished someone had told me at 14, that the careful, quiet ones are not the weak ones, that the people who keep honest records inherit the truth, eventually, even when they inherit nothing else. I did not say a word against his mother. He knew. He had grown up in that house with the bad light and the closed door. I just wanted him to have one adult who had told him the plain version. We still talk. He calls on Sundays. The night I used to drive the overnights. He is in college now, studying accounting, which makes me laugh and ache at the same time. And last month he asked me how to read a wage transcript, and I taught him, line by line. The way Hollis taught me to read a card. That is my salvaged thread. One kid who saw me, and who is going to grow up, able to read the lie when it comes for him. It is enough. It is more than enough. There is one more thing, and then I am done. When the agency was liquidated, its few assets were sold off to pay back what had been taken. There was an auction. Most of it was nothing. Folding tables, a label maker, a van, and on the wall, in lot 41, of all the numbers it could have been, was the old cast iron time clock, Hollis's clock. The clock Diane called decoration. Nobody bid on it. Who wants a dead machine that stamps? Cardboard. I paid the auctioneer $11 and carried it to my car with both arms. The way I had carried the rack of cards a year before. $11. One for every year, they told me. Family doesn't punch a clock. It hangs in my office now, above my desk, next to my father's watch, and 3 framed certificates. It still works. I keep a card in the rack beside it, and on the first morning of every case I take, the case is where some company has done to some other quiet person exactly what was done to me. I feed my card in and let it stamp the date in honest purple ink before I start, because that is what the cheapest thing in the building turned out to be. Not decoration, not scrap. It was the one record nobody could buy, or forge, or shout down. It kept the honest time I gave it, for years, in the dark, waiting for the only person who bothered to learn the language. And then it handed me the truth, stamped and dated, exactly the way an old man promised it would. They built a whole company on the idea that some people work and other people keep the money. And they painted it on the wall in gold and called it family. They were so sure the careful, quiet one would never look closely, never count, never keep a record they could not control. I counted. I am still counting. It is the most honest ledger there is, and unlike everything Diane ever signed, it balances. That is my story. A dead clock. A watch that runs 4 minutes fast. and one old man who told a 19-year-old girl that a record outlasts a loud man. If you have ever been the careful one, the quiet one, the one who showed up and got nothing, and was told that the showing up was the reward, then send this to the person in your family who would understand it. They will know exactly what I mean. And if you believe the truth keeps better records than the loudest voice in the room, subscribe, comment the word clock, and I will see you in the next one. Give it honest time. It gives it right back to you. Someday.